Diane Greene has designed naval ships, built and scaled teams, and co-founded multiple startups. In 1998, she co-founded and served as CEO of VMware. And over the course of 10 years, she took the company public and to a $2 billion run rate. In 2016, Dell acquired VMware as part of its $67 billion merger with EMC, the largest technology deal in history. Now she leads Google's cloud business with major business partners such as Coca-Cola, Snapchat, Disney, and others. She took on this role in 2015 after Bebop, which she co-founded, was acquired by Google for over $380 million. As a search giant enters cloud and grows, she is now leading that team. So we're here tonight to hear her story and her insights as a serial entrepreneur, as a global executive, and as a Valley thought leader. And now to introduce our featured speaker. Here are 5 numbers. $20 billion is the market cap at VMware when she departed as president and CEO. 4 is the number of degrees awarded. 3, the number of companies founded. 3, the number of boards she sits on currently. And 1976, the year she won the National Dinghy Championship in a 420. Wow, for those of you who know sailing, wow, right? So please join me in welcoming to the Computer History Museum stage, serial entrepreneur and the leader of Google Cloud, Diane Greene. So great to have you here, thank you. Well, Diane, it's such a pleasure to have you here at the Computer History Museum. Thank you for coming.
Yeah, it's really a great place to be. Thanks.
Well, I'd love to start our conversation with the last number that we shared, the 1976. There's not very many people that I know that have won a championship in sailing. Tell us, how did your love for the ocean and ships and vessels and water begin?
Okay, well, way back when I grew up in Annapolis, Maryland, and we had a dock in front of our house, and I had 3 brothers, and I was really lucky because I could just get in a boat and go sailing and get away from it all. And so I grew up sailing and racing and racing big boats. I did ocean races and you know, the whole spectrum. And then windsurfing happened, and I got into, you know, when I was sort of, I think, a senior in high school, it came to the Annapolis Boat Show, and I got really interested in it. And so, you know, I just kept doing more and more sailing because I loved that. And then you know, I got into running windsurfing regattas. It was a new sport, and I had met the founders, and they were letting me do that. And then when I was getting ready to graduate from college, I was in mechanical engineering. My advisor had said, or not my advisor, the chair of my department wanted to know what I was going to go do, and I hadn't liked any of the jobs I had found. And I said I was going to go race sailboats. And he said, well, you know, have you ever thought about going to MIT and studying naval architecture? And I was like, no, I hadn't actually. And so anyhow, that was how I ended up actually, you know, I got pretty excited about it. Oh, I could design these for a living. And so anyhow, that was all.
So from growing up by the water, sailing competitively, then you ended up in naval architecture and not only studied but actually designed ships. Is that right?
Yeah, I designed a big roll-on, roll-off cargo carrier, and that went up and down the West Coast. It was an interesting story because by then I was using a computer, but it was a little early for computers. And
do you remember what it was? Since we're at the Computer Museum.
Oh, it was one of
you were using.
I forget what number. It was an HP.
Okay, great.
A mini computer, and Len would probably know. But anyhow, the guy that had the little firm where I was designing that roll-on, roll-off was pretty old-fashioned. Well, he just hadn't gotten into computers. I wouldn't say he was old-fashioned, but anyhow, he wanted me to do everything by hand, and I wanted to, you know, calculate the stability of the ship and do the metacentric height and all the things you have, you know, and how you lay out the cargo with a spreadsheet on a computer. It was a lot faster. We had a big fight, and I quit that job.
So what was next?
Yeah.
So how did you move from naval architecture to computing?
Well, I also then worked at a, well, I worked at a consulting firm in San Francisco that was doing offshore oil rigs, and I was doing actually pretty neat stuff. I got to do the mooring system for Red Adair's firefighting semi-submersible platforms, and anyhow, but I was, we were installing platforms in really deep water in what I consider pretty cool places, the northwestern coast of Australia and the North Sea. But they wouldn't let me go there because there were no quarters for women. And so I, you know, ended up, I learned Fortran and was doing computer work because that was what was left if you couldn't go to the rig. And so I was enjoying that, and I actually didn't see much future for myself in working as a naval architect. So I actually didn't go straight to computer science. I actually quit and moved to Hawaii, but I eventually got back and went to school in computer science.
Well, my mother was born in Hawaii. I think that's too good of a part of the story before you get to computer science to know what. I heard that you were sailing, windsurfing in Hawaii, and may have done some treacherous windsurfing that you've...
Yeah. Well, I mean, windsurfing was just happening. It was a super exciting time. People were just like shortening the booms and making shorter boards like a surfboard and going out in the waves and jumping and surfing the waves, and that hadn't, you know, it had only been done on flat water really before that. So it was super exciting I lived with a little sort of commune of windsurfers, and it was a lot of fun. What you're talking about happened a few years later after I'd returned back to, my father was pretty upset about me living in Hawaii, and I finally moved back to California, but I went over to windsurf some more with some friends, and we had quite an adventure where we decided to windsurf over from Maui to Molokai, and we did that, and then the wind died, and we had to spend the night, and then the next morning the wind came up, and we went to come back, and one of my friend's rig completely broke, and her boyfriend was the other person. He said, well, I got to stay with her. And I was like, I didn't want to stay on Molokai another day. So I windsurfed back. It was probably my favorite experience ever.
Is that
it was
about
very windy.
15 miles each way?
Yeah.
Wow.
So
favorite experience
that
ever.
was like my true Zen experience. Because I really had to concentrate and focus, yeah.
That's remarkable. So as we're talking about you're working on Fortran, you're programming, at what point did you feel the pull towards computing? You got a degree in it, and then what brought you to the Valley working in computing companies?
Well, I mean, I moved to San Francisco, and I remember driving down here and checking it out. What's going on down here? And then I had a job through my windsurfing up in Seattle, up in, what's the name of the town where Microsoft is?
Redmond?
Redmond and, yeah. Bellevue. And I remember this little tiny building that said Microsoft on it. This was really a long time ago. And
We're not counting.
And So anyhow, I had been, when I was at MIT, I had studying naval architecture. I actually ended up, all my friends were doing artificial intelligence and in the AI lab, and I was pretty impressed by what they were doing. And so I finally decided that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to go back to school and study AI. And so after I got back from the windsurfing and did this consulting up in Seattle for windsurfing, for O'Brien Water Skis was up there right next to the Microsoft building, and I was at the O'Brien Water Ski Company. And so then I went back to Berkeley in computer science and got a master's degree.
And had competing.
But I didn't do artificial intelligence. I did databases.
So from there.
Because that was the advisor that would support me.
Okay. I'm hearing this theme about advisors that have roles in your decisions. Tell us about the first jobs other jobs you were with early company, Sybase.
Yeah, Sybase was my
Tandem.
first tech job. I remember I was.
How did you get the job? What was your first project, that you were working on? Do you remember some of those early?
Yeah, well, I remember interviewing. I interviewed with Ingress, which was still a company, and Sybase, and Oracle. And I wanted to live in Berkeley, and Sybase was in Emeryville, and it seemed pretty neat. And so they hired me to be a maintenance engineer. And it turns out that's the best job you can have when you start at a software company, because you get to read all the code and fix bugs everywhere and learn the entire code base, which really served me well. So it was a good job. And then I worked on something called asynchronous I/O, and which I did with a guy at Sun. He was a performance engineer, and Vladna Matna, and we partnered together, and then we won the benchmarks from putting that in, because nobody else had that in their database yet. Seems kind of trivial today. But then my boss was a woman, Roberta Henderson, and she was from IBM, and she'd come to Sybase. She was a really good computer scientist, and we were talking about doing, she thought they needed to do SMP, symmetric multiprocessing, and I figured since this is the Computer History Museum, I can talk about this stuff.
Absolutely.
And
if not here, where?
And so they had stored procedures which they felt would do the job without needing to make it work on symmetric multiprocessing. And she kept insisting, no, you really got to support these SMP. We got to really write multi-threaded code to work with it. And they fired her. And she was actually right. I think. Anyhow, I think Sybase would have done better had they listened to her. But anyhow, I followed her. She went to Tandem, and then I went to Tandem with her. Yeah.
Interesting. And in your work at Tandem.
Oh, I worked at Tandem. So Tandem had the world's best transaction processing fault-tolerant system, just phenomenal system. And there were amazing people like Jim Gray there. But the world was becoming open. Unix was starting to happen. And I came from Unix, having gone to Berkeley and BSD and all that. And so I said, hey, we really got to port everything to this open world. We can't just be on the Guardian operating system. We got to be open. So I got to work with this guy, Franco Puzzolo, who was the chief architect. And we worked this all out, and we built a way to do it with remote procedure call and all this. But they wouldn't really adopt it, and because it's hard, when you have something that's really generating a lot of cash and working to go to something that you can't charge as much for. And
it's a classic problem with incumbents.
And so we both quit, and Franco went to Oracle, and I went to SGI. Yeah.
So I'd like to fast forward to you changing from working at some of the companies here in the Valley to the first inkling for you starting your first company. What was the genesis of the idea and the firm?
Well, my first company was this low bandwidth streaming video company called VExtreme. And what happened was I was at SGI and first I went there they had these amazing hardware machines that I knew a database would run really well on. So I went there to port databases so they could do graphics and databases. And then I got interested. They were doing, Jim Clark had started this project with Time Warner around interactive television, which was really a precursor to the web. So we had cable modems, but we were programming ways to stream movies and to order online pizza over these cable modems. And there was no real internet yet. And I was in charge of all the streaming video, and I was like, yeah, well, what about when there isn't that much bandwidth? And so I shared daycare with a guy named Anup Gupta, who was a professor at Stanford. We had 3 kids that we all rotated them around our houses and did daycare together. And he was working on low bandwidth streaming video at Stanford, and then he decided to start a company. And so I joined with him. I was going to run engineering, and then we couldn't convince anybody to be the CEO. We really tried. And so they told me I had to be the CEO until we found someone. And so I did that for a while. And
was that hard to convince you?
Well, I was like, really? I mean, that was a big jump for me to run engineering, because I really was an engineer. And you know, I had led projects, but I hadn't taken Management 101 at all. So, but we were pretty tiny. I mean, there were 5 of us, so it wasn't that bad. But yeah, so I became the CEO, and I went and raised some money and incorporated us, and it was kind of fun. It was interesting. I was enjoying it. But so we did this low band with streaming video, but we could only stream about a postage stamp size video at the time. And it wasn't particularly compelling. And we were a little ahead of our time.
Happy with that.
And I was like, wow, this is really a problem. But it was really, you could see it was where the world's going, and we had this whole kind of YouTube-like vision. And anyhow, fortunately, Microsoft was also looking to the future, and they I think it was about 18 months later, they bought the company for $75 million. It was kind of amazing.
That is amazing.
Yeah.
So going from no experience, no Management 101, then you let's fast forward to starting your next company.
Yeah, well, I learned a lot at that company.
What did you learn from one to the next?
Oh, just things about people and how they get along, and no one's indispensable, and things like that. And and how important communication is, and all kinds of things. I was the only American in the company. Isn't that interesting?
That is.
Yeah.
For that time also.
Yeah. And so let's see what happened after that company. So I had my first kid by then, and so I was pretty happy to be home with him for a while. And then a friend called me to help them with I'm not going to go into it, but to help them with a startup which was doing, it was the first internet ad serving company. It was a company called AdForce that turned into, or Imgis that turned into AdForce, that got bought by this East Coast consolidator whose name I'm forgetting. And anyhow, and then it eventually got bought by DoubleClick, which is now owned by Google. But anyhow, I helped them, and then it was during that time that my husband over at Stanford was doing research in virtual machines. And he saw it as he was very involved in instrumenting operating systems to study them. And he wanted to have a simulator that ran really quickly. And so it was sort of an outgrowth of his simulator work and the fact that he wanted to build a new operating system, but everybody said, if you build a new operating system, no one will use it because there won't be any applications that run on it. And so then he got this idea I could do virtual machines and have multiple operating systems, and the applications could run on an existing operating system, but he could have his new operating system side by side, and then he used the simulator technology to make it work really well. And they got it going on a MIPS chip, and because that was the easiest architecture to do virtualization on, because ironically, Intel, when they went to build the Intel chip, IBM invented virtualization, but it was, it died out because everybody thought, well, that was when you had mainframes and they were so expensive, but who needs them in the Intel world? And so they didn't put any support for virtualization into the Intel chip. They have full virtualization support today. So really, the huge barrier to entry VMware had was nobody else could really make virtualization work on the Intel architecture with the kind of performance we had, which we, actually the first time we booted Windows on a Linux operating system, it went 8 minutes to boot. I was like, okay.
Okay. Now
but
what?
anyhow, so anyhow, he had the idea, and I was like, this would be, well, first thing that happened, he had a paper under blind review with, for an operating system's SOSP, and then he got a note from someone at University of Washington that Bill G. and Nathan Miravold, and Rick Rashid, and all these other people, David Cutler, would like to read his paper, which was really strange. I said, well, we get a patent filed, and anyhow, but they actually didn't go do it up at Microsoft, actually, because Dave Cutler didn't want to do it. But I'm probably going into too much detail. But anyhow, so we decided to do this, and the graduate students joined us, and we saw it as just a completely useful thing for every computer. And we founded the company to bring that virtualization to market on standard commodity hardware.
So from that,
I could describe what virtualization is, but I think people know.
I think this crowd knows. From that beginning, as you look at this incredible, growth that you led VMware through, what was at the heart of that ability to grow? You were growing your customers, your product, your engineering teams, your revenue.
We had a phenomenal team of people. I mean, so we had phenomenal engineers from day one. And once we set the bar like this, it was easy to, other great engineers wanted to work with great engineers. So we just had a phenomenal thing going on with engineering. And then when we got to 10 engineers, I said I needed an office manager. And I won't go into the story of how I found her. It's cute, but anyhow, I found this former PhD in microbiology whose husband was the CEO of a biotech company, and they had just moved to Palo Alto. And she found my ad that I put in the Palo Alto Weekly because there was no Craigslist to be so curious. She came in out of curiosity, and then I convinced her to be my office manager, and she really was the chief operating officer. She was amazing. So she was always putting things in place like recruiting programs and immigration lawyers and all those things we needed. And then I always had a policy of if I got too busy, it meant I need to hire someone else. So I'd make a list of everything I was doing and then go find a person to do a big chunk of it. And that was sort of how we but we just, brick by brick, it was a very organic scaling of the company. One of the things that worked the best for me was I was a pretty nervous speaker. I've gotten a little more comfortable, but I literally would lose my voice. I would get so nervous if I had to speak in front of a crowd. So I decided to once we got to about 20 people, I did a company all hands once a week. And because that happened so gradually that we got to thousands of people, and I did it every week, I learned how to not be nervous.
I love that. I love that. That's an amazing story. So from 20 to thousands, and 52 times you just were practicing a year. So
with a really friendly audience.
So the IPO, I remember this, was just stunning, right? The year was it 2007?
Yeah.
IPO, stock shot up, historic kind of jump. Was it maybe over 75% jump in price, right?
Yeah.
Incredible. As you look at that time, what do you remember of that kind of that moment of going from early with your team, initial kind of research students, and then what was that moment like of this birth of the company going public?
Well, we were there with all the founders, which was wonderful, and all the founders had gotten married and had kids, so everybody's family was there, so that was pretty fun. And then at VMware, this isn't really the question you asked, but that was what was in my mind, because VMware was because it was early in the morning, they all came in very early, I think, for the opening. So they were all there having breakfast at 5:30 in the morning or something. And so, that sense of community and what we had all built was pretty amazing.
It is amazing. And you think about kind of lessons learned from company one, from VExtreme to VMware, and then making a jump to becoming part of another company, which was a company that you started again, right, with Bebop. What led you to that next sort of start of the next company?
Start another company.
To start another company. Did you think that you were going to be a serial entrepreneur?
No, I wasn't planning to ever start another company. And what happened was I was trying to convince people to go build a certain thing, and I was going to help them. I would fund them and do what I could to support them, but I really wasn't getting any takers. And I ran into a professor at Stanford who was asking me what I was doing, and I kind of was making some jokes about this thing I was talking to a bunch of people about doing, and not, it wasn't happening. And he said, well, we should do it. And it was someone I had a lot of respect for. So we started meeting, and he convinced me to go do it with him. The problem was he left. And so then, I would never start a company alone. I like having partners when I build a company. So anyhow, but it worked out because some VMware people came and they joined as co-founders too, some really wonderful people. And so we were building Bebop, pretty happily. Yeah. And they just had a big launch today, Bebop. One of the things we had built,
Well, congratulations to all of your Bebop colleagues. So going from several companies that you've built to then moving into Google, where you're a part of a larger company that was founded by others, how did that, you'd been on the board, and then Bebop was acquired. How did you make that decision to join the cloud, leading the cloud?
Well, that was very, very complicated, but we had just actually raised our first round it was my first VC round ever. And
is that right?
Yeah.
Ever?
And, yeah. And Actually, the VCs were always accusing me of not liking them and not believing on them. So I'm like, I'm going to prove them wrong. I'm going to take VC money. And I took VC money from 3 VCs. And
Not just one, but 3.
Yeah. And all people I had a lot of respect for. And so we had done that. And so I was at the time, as a board member, working with Google Cloud and trying to help them hire someone to run the business, and suggesting names and interviewing people and so on and so on. And through that, I got to be very good friends with Urs Huszel, who really built all of Google's infrastructure, employee number 8 at Google, very brilliant computer scientist and very wonderful person. And so, he kept saying, well, I really think it needs to be you. And Larry had been trying to convince me to come over to Google before that, I think. And so, we were interviewing people, and we finally found someone that I thought really that everybody thought had the scale to do it and the experience to do it. And I remember it's at a board meeting, and I'm like, Sundar, did you hire him? And he's like, no, we decided not to. And at that point, I had so much sense of ownership, as a board member and as working with Urs, I just went, okay, I'll do it. Because I could see a lot of things. There were a lot of technologies at Google that would benefit Bebop. I really wasn't wanting to sell Bebop, but and so I went back to Bebop, and we talked about, would we do this, and how would we do this, and how would we set it up if we were to do this, and everybody got comfortable with it, and I never get to go to Bebop anymore. I'm just at Google. Yeah. But it's really exciting. It's amazing running Google Cloud. It's I can't imagine something more interesting to do. The technologies, and it's a revolution going on as everybody moves to the cloud, and the scale of it. I mean, we spent the last 3 years, we spent about $10 billion a year in CapEx. We have hundreds of thousands of fiber optic cable under the world's oceans, and we serve, 1 billion hours of YouTube watch time a day, and just all, 2 trillion searches, and it's the amazing scale, and just bigger and bigger all the time, and it's all over the world. And then the companies that are coming to us I could tell you about some of those cool companies. They're amazing.
I would love, I would think we'd all be interested to hear. Tell us about your customers who you're working with and collaborating. What are you collaborating on with them?
Well, we're collaborating on all kinds of things, a lot of artificial intelligence and data analytics and everything. But I just think people might, like this one company I recently met over in Singapore called Gojek. People might have heard of it. But they do ride sharing on a motorcycle.
This sounds fun.
Were founded by some 20-some-year-olds in Jakarta, and they were scaling up so fast, and they had to hire riders so fast that they rented out a soccer stadium, and they had the driver applicants come in the door and take a test. If they got through that, they got trained. Once they got through that, they got a jacket and 2 motorcycle helmets, and they downloaded the app. They walked out the door of the stadium, and they already had someone calling them for a ride. And they're growing 700%. I mean, it's just amazing. And they're delivering more than people now. They're delivering anything they can fit on the motorcycle. Yeah, it's really cool.
Amazing.
And then there's another company up in San Francisco that builds little tiny satellites called Planet. And they take a complete picture of the whole world every 3 hours at, I think, 30 centimeters of resolution. And they're throwing up hundreds of satellites because they're so inexpensive. And they actually manufacture them in South of Market in San Francisco.
Amazing.
Yeah, so there's just a lot of Pokemon Go, that was pretty fun, that launched. They were 50x what they predicted their usage would be. And we just handled it because of our scale. You couldn't have done a startup without the cloud that would have succeeded, that had that kind of...
Yeah, the ability to scale.
Yeah.
So when you think about, you've gone on record saying that by 2022 you'd like to lead in cloud. What are the strengths that you are building to make that vision a reality?
So we already have a bunch of strengths in our infrastructure. I think we have the world, best network and whatnot. And we have an amazing assemblage of engineering talent and AI know-how. So we have a lot of great assets, and we had a lot of catch-up to do to have all the things an enterprise would need to move to a cloud that we didn't necessarily need internally at Google, like identity and access control and different kinds of networking configurations and so on. So we've had to get caught up. We're caught up now. And then the regulatory, I think, is one of the most actually interesting things about the cloud, because it's different in every country and it kind of mirrors geopolitics.
Say more about that. That's a really important issue that I think maybe not be talked about very much.
Yeah, well, a lot of countries are saying they want their data just locally, or they want to have access to the data, or so there's a lot of very thorny issues, and maybe that's not okay in every country, but you got to treat all countries the same, but each one has different regulatory and it's so you have to kind of do new things in order to work with all these people. And then there's the normal challenges of it's not necessarily an even playing field between what we let the Chinese companies do and what China lets the American companies do. And but our customers, really wanted the same all over the world, in China and everywhere, because they're international companies. So, they're very global in their thinking, but the governments are very territorial in their thinking. Yeah.
I think that's one of the biggest challenges for global companies, figuring that out. I'd like to go back to you're talking about services and kind of capabilities that you're building with cloud, and you're starting to talk about kind of the analytics and the role that AI and machine learning is playing in what you can offer your customers. Can you say more about kind of how that's rolling out and what some of your customers are
Yeah, sure. AI is the other revolution, mobile, big data, cloud, AI. So AI is changing things remarkably fast, because it's such a huge, like for instance, diagnostics, you can diagnose different kinds of cancer or a fracture, or one of the first diagnostics that a lot of people kind of did at the same time was diabetic retinopathy. And when you get enough images and the outcomes, you can do deep learning on it with a neural network and do much better than a doctor, and then it just keeps getting better and better the more images it looks at, or what we can do with the human-computer interface and speech recognition and real-time language translation or in banking with fraud detection, or there's a lot of things you can do in the financial markets and media and you name it. There's this sort of step function once you can use machine learning, or what's happening with robotics. We all see it, these self-driving cars and so on, but so that is changing every company, right? That they, need to quickly get expertise in taking their data and getting it into a shape where they can make use of these new ways of understanding their data and do whatever they do. I mean, we did this thing at Google where we've been optimizing our data centers for low energy usage. We're just about carbon neutral in our data centers. We use about half the power of our other data centers. And anyhow, so the cooling, they decided to take the cooling with all this, all the weather history and the load history and all the valve settings and every input, hundreds of inputs, and put it into a machine learning, put it through, build a model and see if they could do better. And in the best case, in one of the data centers, they reduce humans have been optimizing this for 14 years, doing everything they could to get the power down. And in the best case, in one of the data centers, they saved 40%.
It's amazing.
From the deep learning. So, it's just a big change.
Order of
for the better. Yeah.
I'd like to pursue this idea of AI, but focus it on the team. I think you recently announced some new team members who joined you from Stanford, and tell us about how you're...
Fei?
Yes.
Yeah.
Kind of building your team and thinking about kind of the capabilities.
Yeah, as soon as I got there, I started recruiting. It's all I do. It's the top priority because I can't do anything without the people. And so in AI, so Google has phenomenal, they have DeepBrain that won the AlphaGo, and they have DeepMind, and then they have Google Brain led by Jeff Dean, which is doing a lot internally at Google and also with medical and also, speech and translation and image recognition and even video recognition now. But we didn't have a group in cloud, and it's the most fascinating place to be because we see all these amazing companies and what they're doing, and we see how to help them and bring it to everybody. So I wanted to have someone to lead that, and I've known Fei really since she came to Stanford. She was running the AI lab, artificial intelligence lab at Stanford, and I heard a rumor that she was looking at going into industry for a little while. So anyhow, she came to Google and is leading up our AI efforts. So that was really wonderful. She's tremendous to get to work with, and has quite a vision. And she's doing a lot around AI for all, but she also has this group that is, she thinks it's very important to bring diversity to AI because, there's some unconscious decisions that get made, biases maybe that get into the AI, and so you want to have fully diverse group of people building it. And she's pretty eloquent when she describes that. And so she's doing that in addition to, helping us bring AI to our customers.
So it's can't help but notice that in this case, you've been a remarkable leader and also happen to be a woman, and some of the top people that you recruited are also women. Judging by the news these days, it's not easy to be a woman tech person or a woman entrepreneur here in the Valley, and I'm just curious your perspective that you've had in working, and you described as some of these male-dominated industries. You couldn't go work on the rig. There were some opportunities that might have been given to others, or challenges that you might have met along the way. Challenges that you've met, and how your perspective is now for women in tech.
Well, I thought that, I'm blanking on her name, the woman that wrote the blog at Uber.
Susan Fowler?
Susan Fowler. I thought that was almost a seminal moment in terms of someone, really documenting with clear examples and with a lot of credibility some things that were going on in a company. it was clearly not a good environment there, and it was, pretty bold of her to do that. And, it's sort of been over the years that I'd never noticed it. And I kind of
Say that again. Say that again. You never noticed it?
I mean, I just was, I don't know, I grew up with 3 brothers, and I just, you just deal with things and, find your way there. But now I have a lot more sympathy when I see, wow, this was tough and not right. And also I'm enjoying having more women to work with. I'm finding, gosh, this is a lot more fun. And and so that, that's kind of new, having a lot of women around. Google board's got 3 women, Intuit board's got 3 or 4 women, I think. And so I think it's good that the Valley is addressing it, and I think it's good that people are focusing on more diversity. There is a huge pipeline problem, and so you have to, build people up, and that's happening. I mean, if you look at the universities, the number of, especially at the elite universities, the number of women majoring in engineering and computer science is getting pretty, like MIT is 50-50. And so clearly things are changing when you look at these numbers. I mean, when I went to MIT, I think it was about 10% women or something like that. But, and so that's all, going in a good direction. And I think it's great that every woman knows, is getting a lot more support.
It's needed.
Yeah.
Isn't it?
And my job is just to make sure anywhere that I have influence over is, a really safe place where if anybody saw a problem, they could speak up, but hopefully never sees or feels the problem.
That's the hope.
Yeah.
Right? We still have work.
Yeah.
We still have work to do, and it takes really vigilance by people at all levels to make sure that we're moving forward.
Yeah.
I'd like to turn now to, before we get audience members, make sure you're writing questions down, but thinking of kind of pulling the periscope back and looking at the Valley more broadly. You've been at the heart of the Valley for a long time in many roles, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on what's changing in the Valley as an environment for entrepreneurs.
Yeah, well, it's become world famous as an environment for entrepreneurs, and it's definitely thriving. I mean, you can go to your doctor and they know the culture of every tech company in the Valley. And I found out they ask you because they have a barometer for the stress level of the different companies. And I'm not sure anywhere else in the world that would be the case, or when you go to watch your kid's soccer game, everybody's talking about tech on the sidelines, and you're recruiting and whatnot, but what's happened, is with with the technology, it's become so much easier to build software that you don't need a lot of capital. There's all this open source. There's all these APIs, and it's just, you can assemble more, you can build when you have an idea, you can build things more quickly. And then I think there's the VCs have become this completely full service place where if if a VC funds you, they have a former head of sales to help you with your sales strategy, a former head of marketing, a former head of PR, and then experienced CEOs to mentor you, and it's an environment where you can learn really quickly because there's all these experts that are really easy to talk to, easily accessible to ask questions to and talk to. So I think that's really great. And then I think it's kind of interesting that if you look at, there's been this huge expansion to San Francisco, And if you look at what's happening, I mean, the geography from San Jose up to San Francisco is kind of the tech stack, where like the chip people are down in San Jose, and then you kind of get into the systems people, and then you kind of get into the applications people, and you get up to San Francisco, and it's kind of the designers.
This is a new map.
There's exceptions, but it's like, because when I went to build Bebop, I couldn't get them all in one place, so we founded the company with 2 offices because we needed people from the whole stack. And so we did this thing where we were 2 days a week in Palo Alto and 2 days a week in San Francisco, and 1 day a week you could be wherever you wanted.
I like that.
That's how we ran the company for a couple years. Yeah.
Another part of the valley is not only dynamic change and success. Not everything is always up and to the right. And for young entrepreneurs who are looking at you, it might be daunting to see somebody who's had so much success after success. As you reflect back, is there an experience that you had when you actually experienced failure or a major setback, significant challenge that you could share sort of lessons learned and perhaps a word of encouragement for people who are in the middle of that right now?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think I learned how to deal with that racing sailboats because, it's a pretty unforgiving environment when you're racing a boat. I mean, nothing waits for you. Like if you make a mistake, you fall behind, and if you do something smart, you get ahead, and you got to really keep reevaluating what you're doing, and you're always trying to navigate to win. And there's lots of different ways to do it, and so you just have to keep finding that way, and that's kind of how I think about everything I do. I just got to navigate that didn't work. Let me try another way, and so I have, we had a few times at VMware that we didn't get very good news, and I remember we were doing this huge deal with IBM, and they said, we can't do it with you because you have GNU public license software, and if we resell you, we might contaminate our entire software stack and have to open source it, so we're not going to be able to resell you. And that was a really dark day. And then, but you just find, like in that case, we had this idea. I wonder if their resellers sell us, whether they'll be contaminated. So we asked the lawyers, and they said, no, that would be okay. Well, that worked out to be an unbelievable advantage because they did want to bring us to market, so they took us to their worldwide reseller org. How many startups would give their eye teeth for that? And their whole I got to keynote at their worldwide reseller conference and tell them all about VMware, and then go train them. We got to go train them in how to sell VMware. That was pretty good. But it started with a very, dark day. And so, sometimes you can't find your way out of it, and you just really got to change course. But I think it's just being resilient, never say die. Or, if it's time to say die and move on.
The Phoenix. Well, I'd like to ask one last question before we bring in the audience. And earlier tonight, I asked if you were to give one word of advice to a new entrepreneur, what would that be? And maybe you'd like to reveal that word. And
they asked me, I had to write on here one word for being an entrepreneur. And I wrote it on one piece of cardboard. It didn't look very good, so I wrote it again with my fun letters. Anyhow, it says tenacity. Which is actually what I was just talking about, more or less, that that, it's to kind of know where you want to go, to always keep in mind where you want to go and, how to get there and why that's where you want to go and what all your assumptions are. And so if you really are convinced it's the right way to go and nobody's been able to show you that it's not the right way to go, and you think about it more than anybody else, so you're probably right, you're probably the world expert in where you should go, then just be tenacious about getting there. And
is there a story or an experience that helps kind of bring this to life?
I gave you about 5 different stories. Is there?
All of them were interesting. Is there one that you'd like to share with the audience?
I don't know which was the best one.
They were all good.
Which?
How about your
job or
sure,
getting my job? And well, when I was graduating from MIT in Naval Architecture, did I tell this? No. I wanted to come to San Francisco. I didn't want to go to Houston, and I had run a Windsurfing Worlds in San Francisco Bay, and I really knew I wanted to come out here and sail. And so I got the name of a firm, and the firm that wouldn't send me to the offshore, and I got the name of a naval architect there, and I wrote him a letter, and I never heard back from him. So I called him up, and he said, "Oh yeah, I got your resume. We're really not hiring." And he said, I noticed you sailed, and I had put the women's national champion at the bottom of my resume. And instead of saying, "Oh yeah, I sail, thanks a lot, bye," I said, "Oh, you sail?" And I started just peppering him with questions about, do you have to wear a wetsuit, and what's the tide? The tides are horrendous there. Have you ever capsized? Are there sharks? And partway through these questions, he all of a sudden said, "Maybe we'll interview you." And he flew me out, and I interviewed and managed to get the job. Yeah.
Amazing. That's great.
Yeah.
Well, we have a big pile of questions. Let me start with this one on the top. Congratulations on the launch of Google Hire to you and the Bebop team.
Thank you.
Do you feel that other aspects of your company have been well integrated into the Google ecosystem?
Well, they have, because we did. Is the press here, by the way? Because
we do.
I can't really answer if the press is here, really. I mean, yeah. Anyhow, if anybody's heard about some kind of jobs API stuff that's maybe in Google search now, that was maybe Bebop.
Maybe. Okay. Next, this is one from somebody who's watching on Facebook Live. Do you think more innovations will happen in the hardware side of cloud or software? And do you think there'll be more innovations on the storage side?
God, there's so many innovations. One thing that's so interesting is when you're operating at that scale, you can optimize in a way you could never dream of when you were just building a component. And so there will be lots. Google's always building. We build proprietary chips for security, and we, hardware authenticating at the hardware level, and we have our own processors for TensorFlow, our machine learning infrastructure. And so those kinds of things, in the storage and how we do our back, all that, the networks, enormous innovation going on. But there's also enormous innovation going on in the system software as well. And then in the machine learning. And the machine learning, there's so much research happening to make it easier to use by anybody. And so, and what you can do with the data. So, it's a pretty rich environment. And I have to say it's a rich environment for startups as well. it's a very fertile time because everything's suddenly changing. Every company is moving to the cloud, but they're going to be in both places for a long time. And how they get between them, there's a lot of room for innovation. And then there's just so many things you can do for them once they get to the cloud that there's a lot of room for innovation.
Fascinating time. Here's a question that asks you to look back. Two questions that are related. VMware is one of the last successful standalone infrastructure software companies. Do you think there'll be more in the cloud world?
Yeah, I do. You'd have to do some pretty innovative hardware, I think, because the cloud vendors are innovating there, but the whole system infrastructure, I mean, there's always new ideas that yeah, you can never say never, of course. Some areas are getting more commoditized as they mature. And I think it's hard, it's gonna, over time, as everything gets in the cloud, maybe it's gonna be harder to build a whole storage system and sell it because the cloud vendors aren't gonna buy it unless you did some totally revolutionary thing that they don't know how to do.
Possible.
There's always, whenever you can invent something that nobody else knows how to do that's super valuable, that's a pretty winning thing, but that doesn't happen that often.
That's true. Here's a question about growth.
But not to say the people here couldn't do it. Yeah.
Here's a challenge. Here's a question about your key focus areas since you've been a serial entrepreneur. What are the key focus areas to focus on when building your company in the very early stages from scratch? And then how does that change when you're scaling from maybe 1 million to 1 billion or more?
Well, if you really want to build actually, this is an interesting story. I was recently visiting with the founder of a private equity firm, very successful private equity firm, and he was lamenting the fact, he lives in Texas, he was lamenting the fact that the companies in Silicon Valley that he sees and that they buy were not built for the long term. So when they buy them, they have to kind of redo the whole company because it wasn't built for the long term. And he said it'd be nice if they were, so we didn't have to always do that. Then, because what I was just going to start out with is if you really want to build a long-term company, you kind of have to know where you're going so that as you do all the incremental milestones along the way, you're keeping track of it being aligned with where you want to go. And so if you're designing a function, you take into, whatever you're designing, you take into account all the things it might have to do someday. You might elect not to do them all, but you need to make it so it'll be easy when you need to add the scaling, it'll be easy to add. But I think when you build a company, I kind of think of it, you're laying it brick by brick, and you're doing it just the way you want to do it for where you want to go. And so, make sure you have people that you want to work with that you think are the best possible people to do the job that you were able to hire. I mean, sometimes you can't hire the best possible person, so then you have to go through this continual upgrade process that's not as much fun. But I think it's just always think about where you have to kind of execute in the immediate, but do it in a way that works for the long term. And if you just keep doing that and stay ahead on the hiring. One trick I used to do was it's a lot easier to hire individual contributors than it is to hire managers, and it's even harder to hire directors. So as you scale, you all of a sudden go, whoa, we don't have enough directors. So I always put a hiring freeze on until those people are hired, and they suddenly get hired.
It's a good trick.
Yeah.
Great. Here's a question about AI on the social side. How can AI in the cloud help solve social problems the public sector can't solve, or but perhaps we may not have the political will to solve. So how can AI and cloud address?
Well, health is a really easy example where, we're going to have all these ways to diagnose diseases and do predictive health analytics and monitor, where you're not going to need to go to the doctor to get diagnosed. Or, you could be anywhere in the world and it doesn't necessarily cost money to diagnose you. So it will bring much higher quality healthcare to the entire world by being able to use, the encapsulation of a doctor's expertise in the AI. And I think that's an area where you'll see a lot of social good. How do you I was going to crack a political joke, but
Feel free.
no, it's okay. Not the John Oliver show.
Okay. This is one following up on your question about recruiting people, about how do you recruit and then manage and retain the best people? You've talked a lot about attracting people and...
Well, I think you can recruit a great person if you have a vision that they find compelling. And you can show them how you're going to get to that vision and why they're needed. Like, their unique expertise is what's going to get you to that vision. And so then, the person... And I have to say, at VMware, it was pretty straightforward to recruit top engineers. Part of it was who we had, and part of it was the vision. Like, when we went to raise money, we didn't go to VCs. We went to computer scientists that had money, because they understood immediately what we were doing. And so recruiting the engineers, it was Andy Bechtelsheim and John Hennessy and David at Stanford, Sheridan. And so, they got it in about an hour. And but then when we went to recruit salespeople, it was a lot harder. Well, because they weren't technical and we didn't have a market. And even if they had understood it, if there wasn't a market, they were kind of scratching their head how they were going to exceed their quota, which was fair. But then it got easy by, then we used to joke. People used to make fun of our reports. They did a wonderful job. We had superb sales organization, but people would still make the bankers and stuff. I remember once at a conference said, "Oh, you're just taking orders." They really took umbrage with that. But so how do you so that's how you recruit, and then how do you retain people? Well, you have to have a wonderful environment to work in. So you really have to focus on.
How does it feel in nitty-gritty terms? I mean, what?
Well, I think there's sort of three things. You have to kind of enjoy the people you're working with, and coming to work every day is something you feels good to walk into the office, and it feels good to be with these people, and they're stimulating. And I think you have to feel like what you're building, you're excited about who's going to use it and how they're going to use it and what impact it's going to have on them. And then I think you have to feel like you're being treated fairly and compensated fairly. And if you can keep those three things, people are, it feels pretty good. And there's a lot of focus in Silicon Valley on culture right now, because you don't want it to be all the money, or you don't want it, you need all three things. And people will, I think, generally stay.
Well, you've been able to attract and lead amazing people.
And then you kind of give them, let them run, right? Empower them to use their talents, of course. Yeah, that's the secret.
Here's a question. I'm a middle school teacher from Wisconsin. The push seems to be to do everything with technology. What is your opinion on finding balance between technology and other learning and teaching methods? And can you comment on anything that Google has new for educators?
Yeah.
And
Yes, I can. We actually have something called Chromebooks, which are these very safe computers where the operating system's in the cloud and updated in the cloud, and they're inexpensive, and they're some 55% of schools now in the U.S., I think. And then we have the document management, Google Docs and Google Drive and all that we give for free to education. G Suite is what we call it. And then we have this thing called Classroom that helps the teachers manage everything. That's been a huge hit. And then Google's philanthropy side is doing a lot in education. I recently had the opportunity to meet with the former Prime Minister of Italy and a bunch of his folks, and they are very concerned about technology and what it will do to the Italian culture, and I think that's kind of where maybe this question is coming from. And it's interesting that, you know, it's not just technology. Technology is a tool, and it's, you know, you still want to get outside and do things. You know, obviously you want to have a full life, but the technology. I have another friend that's a botany, evolutionary biology professor at Georgetown, and we were hiking recently, and you know how you can take your camera and point it at a leaf, and it'll tell you what kind of leaf it is. And she was complaining about that. She goes, people don't study leaves anymore. They just point their phone at it, and it tells it what it is. So she can't, you know, give these assignments to her students.
Here it says multiple people asked this question. During a recent interview, Elon Musk said that we need regulatory oversight on AI. What is your opinion?
Well, normally, if you're going to regulate something, you want to understand it extremely well. And there is, and it's, you know, it's, I mean, that's like something I think about a lot, is how do we get the regulators so they're expert enough that they make good decisions, because they tend to make pretty prescriptive decisions when actually a little higher level decision might be more valuable to the world. And so number one, I think it's kind of wacky to say the regulators should tell us what to do with AI, because maybe if Elon's the regulator, it'll work. But we're still years away from what he's worried about, and I think there's a lot going on in the world to try and, I think he said it was just inconsistent, because he was saying the governments should do it, but which governments should do it? And so that was a strange interview, I thought. But there is a huge debate around, do we need to worry about AI? And I'm kind of an optimist that basically we're all trying to help the world and do good. Not everybody, but a ton of people that are very sophisticated at technology are trying to make the world a better place. And we all just have to keep doing our best to make this work out. But it's just so much good that this AI technology is doing in the world. It really is solving a lot of problems and bringing value to every, in a more democratizing AI means bringing all this technology in an easy to consume way to anybody in the world, regardless of their circumstances. And I think that's a great thing. Yeah.
Good to hear your comments on that. Thank you. Another question that multiple people asked, I'll read it exactly, it's here. Once you take away making more money as a key motivator, what motivates you to keep working?
Yeah, actually, I put all the money from Bebop in a donor-advised fund. I didn't keep any of it. My husband and I did. So I've never worked for money. I just never set out to have money. I set out to sail. and so I just, like to do things that are interesting with people that I really enjoy working with. And maybe at this point it's a form of exercise for my brain so I don't get old, but I don't know.
Thank you. And if here's a question that's related to that. What do you see as your legacy?
I guess my kids.
Best possible legacy.
Yeah.
Well, Diane, it's been just a remarkable pleasure to have you here at the Computer History Museum. And as promised, you've taken us on a journey of building ships, companies, and the cloud. May you have the winds and sea and water as you continue in your journey ahead. Thank you again.
Thank you.